I needed a job. I needed the shekels, and I was desperate. I was in a bind, and I jumped on Craigslist, which is like the bayous, the backwater of sort of searching for work. And at that time I was vegan, so I was like, you know what? I'm typing like vegan jobs. Pull up, I find a job delivering kombucha. I didn't even know what kombucha was at the time. Delivering kombucha. So I hit the guy up immediately. I noticed from the accent he was a Jewish guy for sure, and I just didn't know what I was going to get myself into. So he tells me, all right, let's meet up here. Tells me it's a cash arrangement. I think at that time it must have been like $8 an hour, but it was cash, right? I wasn't going to report it to anyone. And his argument was that he was going to give me more money if things worked out. Of course, he was never going to give me more money if things worked out, because that just wasn't that was just part of his shtick. So anyhow, we meet up at a point. We start working together. This guy, I don't even remember the guy's name anymore, but I pull up to the spot that he arranges for us to meet, and he's decrepit, he's mangled, he's downtrodden. I mean, he's wearing these dirty pants and this dirty white shirt, and he's looking really scruff in the face. For sure, like a homeless aesthetic. So he's like an octogenarian, he's blind, and he's a raw vegan, right? So I'm just like, so this guy's just operating off of, he had like a Nextel type of phone, so he's just operating off of voice commands, and he's just writing shotgun with me, and that's how the operation starts. So I start to work with the guy, and obviously he takes a liking to me, and he starts calling me every day. So we're working together 12 plus hours a day, delivering kombucha in a beat up Prius that he would rent, and we're driving around, and I'm just like looking at this guy, and a couple of things that stood out to me was that, you know, because there is this sort of lore about, well, Jews are just more intelligent than everybody else, or the nepotism, right? Or, you know, there's all these reasons why people say they have power. But the thing that I noticed for sure on a guy like that was that, one, this guy was blind. Two, he was old. And three, he was operating in the negative, right? He had the whole operation was in the negatives. There was no profit behind this enterprise at all. One, we were operating out of a Prius, and doesn't make any sense to do such a thing. But the point is, I was looking at it from the perspective of like, okay, what can I learn, right? If indeed the Jews run the world, what could I learn from this guy? And what I did notice, I could not take away from him, was his insatiable thirst and energy and gusto to get out there and get after it, no matter if it was a losing proposition. But that's what kept the guy alive. That was a big essential component of his identity, was that he was going to get up in the morning and he was going to sell as much kombucha as he could. And so I learned that from him for sure, was that drive, just that energy to get up every day and do the same thing day after day, grind it out. And obviously he couldn't see anything, so his other senses were keen, they were alert, they were awake. The other thing that was interesting was this guy had lost everything. From his story, his origin story was that he had lost everything. He was a real estate mogul in Beverly Hills, grew up in Beverly Hills, you know, so this was an uppity guy, you know, he wasn't like a rags to riches guy. This guy grew up amongst wealth and lost everything in the 80s. He had buildings everywhere and lost all of it. Had a house in Beverly Hills, lost it in a divorce with his wife. And so he ended up in a little apartment, and she was basically like donating to him just to kind of keep his business afloat. She would give him a couple $1,000s a month just to kind of keep it going. And even though it was in the negatives, he was still pushing forward. And he even had, which was fascinating to me, and I was like, oh, this is how they take care of each other. Even though he was losing, he still found a little bit of money to donate to, like, it was like some Jewish organization, some type of charity. And he still found a little bit of money to put off to the side to donate for that cause. And I was like, oh, that's another interesting thing about them, is that even though he wasn't making a ton of money, the little bit that he did manage to make, he would still donate some of that money. So I thought that was another thing to keep in mind as well. The other thing that was very interesting was, the thing that I think kept this guy alive for as long as it did and as sharp as he stayed, was that he had this drive, but also the belief, this crazy belief that he was going to get his vision back if he stayed on a raw vegan diet. So no cooked foods, all raw. And he swore by that, right? He said that he was eventually going to get his vision back. And I don't know if he ever did, right? Because after a while, something had happened with his phone, and I got another job, and that was kind of my way of like exiting out of there gracefully without any hubbub or uproar about me leaving. But at that point, I had kind of gotten tired of it because I was trying to scale the business, and he just wasn't willing to let go of a Prius. I said, buddy, we need a bigger truck. We need a huge van to be able to ship this stuff out. We need multiple drivers if we are to fulfill the orders, because we were always running short, and I was always getting the raw end of the stick from the clients. They were just like, dude, I ordered like 6 boxes of kombucha and all you're bringing me is 3. And it was just a lot of that back and forth. And I was just having to make up stuff that was obviously not true, which was we were never going to be able to deliver what we were promising the clients. But like I said, I think that was one of the most important things I learned about like Jewishness, was that there was a belief, a crazy, wild, insatiable sort of aura of inevitability in the way that they ran things. There was just this crazy belief that things were going to work out, and they were going to damned try their hardest to make it happen. And I was a young guy back then. I was like in my 20s, and I was getting outlapped by an octogenarian. And it was just fascinating to me because I was like, man, like I've never seen this type of mentality before in my life from the Goyim. And I think that's the problem, is that like Gentiles like to complain about, oh, but they have all this power and this and that. And it's just like, bro, like forget about the Jews in that capacity. If anything, you should try to see, well, what is it that they're doing differently that you're not doing? And a lot of what they're doing differently is that it's a question of mentality. It's a spiritual thing. And I think for them in particular, they never want to be victims ever again. And so what they do is they make sure that they take full accountability, complete agency over their lives. They really do embody the whole concept of freedom for themselves. And it was just fascinating to see somebody just kind of show me the way that they lived, the way that they behaved. I wouldn't, you know how it is, it's that whole saying, like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I wouldn't do everything that they do, but I think the good things that I learned from them, I took, right, and kept it. And then the rest of it that didn't really make sense to me, I kind of threw it by the wayside. Like I wouldn't look so disheveled. I'd probably shower. I would have somebody to take care, pay somebody to take care of me, things that he didn't do. I probably wouldn't be, I would even try to tell him like, bro, you've been wearing the same pants for like this entire escapade that we've been on, which was months in the making. Like maybe it's time we get you some new pants. He's like, oh really? I'm like, yeah, bro. Like I know you can't see, but you should be able to smell the fact that you smell like a wet dog. So things like that I would probably refrain from doing, right? Or having to lie to the clients or whatever. Not lie, but like, basically give them the runaround or false promises that were never going to be completed ever, right? Within the enterprise. And so it was just a fascinating experience for me as a young guy, right? Because I had never really been around people that thought that way. Because I think most Goyim, we're taught to kind of just be like, go the safe route. This is the easy money, this and that. And what these guys do, if anything, they're just like, I want total freedom for myself. And the only way to do that is to embark on an enterprise, right? In that regard, they really did embody in many ways the American spirit, which was that they were going to go out and get it. And it didn't matter how difficult or impossible the odds were, they were going to try anyway. And that was like, whoa, man. I was like, psychologically, this is a fascinating sort of mentality, that sort of mercantile, merchant, get it out of the mud type of mentality that I think a lot of people sort of LARP at having, but to actually see it in the flesh and in real time, there was no exhausting somebody with that kind of spiritual sort of thing in the tank, if you will, because everything was, my logical mind was like, everything about this thing stinks, right? The Prius sucks. The amount of